Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this informational webinar walking through the new Section 3 final rule and its related reporting requirements. My name is Mackenzie Martin Waldron. I am the Disaster Recovery Manager on the Department's Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery Team. I'm joined today by Rebecca Schademan, the Department's Consolidated Plan Coordinator. This presentation is intended to reintroduce the new Section 3 final rule and outline the reporting and record-keeping requirements. During this presentation, we plan to cover the following: an overview of the new rule, including what projects qualify as Section 3, new key definitions, Section 3 requirements, benchmarks, and then a deep dive into the reporting and record-keeping requirements, including the necessary supporting documentation and reporting in our grants management system, Amplifund. We'll also provide Section 3 resources related to DED Section 3 resources and HUD Section 3 resources, and let you know about upcoming office hours that we plan to have to go over the Section 3 final rule. We do want to take a moment and acknowledge a few items. The Section 3 final rule has different triggers and benchmarks for public housing programs than for other types of community development projects. This presentation focuses only on compliance for housing and community financial assistance. For additional information regarding the differences in treatment of public housing financial assistance, please see 24 CFR Part 75. We wanted to address the DED programs that are impacted by this new Section 3 final rule. This includes the National Housing Trust Fund, Home Investment Partnerships Program, Home American Rescue Plan Program, the Community Development Block Grant, and the related coronavirus funding, as well as the Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery funding. With that administrative pieces out of the way, we can now examine the purpose of Section 3. As stated on the slide, the purpose of Section 3 is to ensure that economic opportunities, most importantly employment, shall be directed to low and very low income persons, particularly those who are recipients of government assistance for housing or residents of communities where the Section 3 covered project is located. This gives low income persons an opportunity to work on HUD projects that are happening in their own backyard. Overall, DED strives to help Nebraskans achieve an improved quality of life through the development of better communities. HUD's mission strives to create strong, sustainable, inclusive communities and quality, affordable homes for all. In keeping with these ideals, DED wants to ensure that HUD-funded projects maximize community benefits and economic opportunities for low-income persons and households. The Section 3 final rule became effective on November 30th, 2020. This date is very important. Section 3 commitments made before November 30th, 2020 must continue to comply with the previous Section 3 requirements of 24 CFR Part 135. Commitment date is program specific, so you should consult with your DED representative to confirm your project's commitment date to determine which set of rules apply. As a reminder, this presentation is outlining the regulations set forth under the new Section 3 final rule, impacting projects with commitments made on or after November 30th, 2020. The next thing to address is whether the project that you're working on qualifies as a Section 3 project, and therefore if it's subject to compliance with the Section 3 regulations. Section 3 projects are defined as housing rehabilitation, housing construction, and other public construction projects that provide housing and community development financial assistance when the total amount of assistance to the project exceeds a threshold of $200,000. Public construction may include infrastructure work, such as extending water and sewage lines, sidewalk repairs, site preparation, and installing conduits for utility services. Also, this $200,000 threshold is inclusive of total HUD assistance provided at the project level, not just the HUD assistance overseen by DED. For example, if a project is funded with $101,000 of home funds and $100,000 of CDBG funds, then it exceeds the applicability threshold of $200,000, and the Section 3 requirements apply. However, if a project is funded with $100,000 of CDBG funds and $100,000 in state funds, it is not a Section 3 project. This slide is intended to create a visual of when Section 3 is triggered. Section 3 applicability is dependent upon the type of project and project financing as described on the last slide. Section 3 projects are those that involve housing rehabilitation, housing construction, demolition, or other public construction, and exceed the threshold of $200,000 of HUD funds. As listed on the slide, HUD funds may include HTF, Home, Home Arts, Home ARP, CDBG, and a slew of other options. It's also important for us to delve further down into the definition of a project. A project is the site or sites together with any buildings or improvements located on the site that are under common ownership, management, and financing. Please note the conjunctive "and" used and the use of it in section 75.3 of the regulations. This means that the three must be common ownership, management, and financing for section 3 to be triggered. All three must be true. For example, home funds used to rehabilitate 20 rental units in one building as part of an effort to rehabilitate 40 rental units in 2 buildings on a single property. The section 3 project would be defined as the rehabilitation of all 40 units. Additionally, the section 3 requirements apply to the entire section 3 project, regardless of whether the project is fully or partially assisted under HUD programs that provide housing and community development financial assistance. Subrecipients and developers should keep in mind that existing projects may trigger section 3 compliance even after the initial commitment date. If the project includes other HUD funding or additional HUD funding meeting the applicability threshold. For example, funding provided in phases, such as multifamily housing rehabilitation, that maybe initially receives $150,000 of home assistance, would trigger section 3 requirements if it receives an additional amount exceeding $50,000 in housing and community development assistance. Before examining the section 3 final rule requirements, we think it's important to address a few key definitions. As noted on the slide, a section 3 worker means any worker who currently fits or when hired within the past 5 years fit at least one of the following categories. The worker's income for the previous year or annualized calendar year is below the HUD established income limit. The worker is employed by a section 3 business concern, or the worker is a youth build participant. The 5-year period for a worker cannot begin before the November 30th, 2020 effective date. Therefore, section 3 workers hired prior to November 30th, 2020 may be certified for a 5-year period beginning November 30th, 2020. If you focus your attention to the yellow box on the screen, we just want to mention that Youth Build is a community-based pre-apprenticeship program that provides job training and educational opportunities for at-risk youth ages 16 to 24. Finally, a section 3 business concern means a business concern documented within the last 6-month period to be at least 51% owned and controlled by low or very low income persons, greater than 75% of the labor hours performed for the business over the prior 3-month period are performed by section 3 workers, or at least 51% of the business is owned and controlled by current public housing residents or residents who currently live in section 8 assisted housing. These definitions are very important in examining the employment, training, and contracting requirements of section 3. Additionally, the section 3 final rule introduces a new definition for targeted section 3 worker. A targeted section 3 worker is a section 3 worker who is employed by a section 3 business concern, or a worker who currently fits or when hired fit at least one of the following categories as documented within the past 5 years. That worker lives within the service area or the neighborhood of the project. This will be addressed on the next slide. Or that worker is a youth build participant. As demonstrated in the graphic on the screen, targeted section 3 workers are a focused subset of section 3 workers. So therefore, if you qualify as a targeted section 3 worker, by default, you qualify as a section 3 worker. Finally, a service area or a neighborhood of the project is defined as an area within 1 mile of the section 3 project, or if fewer than 5,000 people live within the 1 mile of the section 3 project, within a circle centered on the section 3 project that is sufficient to encompass a population of 5,000 people according to the most recent US Census. The graphic on the screen is attempting to illustrate this definition. Imagine the gray circle is an area within 1 mile of the project. It is a population of 1,000 people. Because there is less than 5,000 people within the 1 mile of the worksite, we must expand the circle around the project until it encompasses 5,000 people. In this example, it is expanded 50 miles to encapsulate a population of 5,000 people. HUD is currently developing an online tool to assist in determining these service areas. And going into the Section 3 requirements related to employment and training, the requirements are to the greatest extent feasible and consistent with existing federal, state, and local laws and regulations. Subrecipients and developers shall ensure that employment and training opportunities in connection with Section 3 projects are provided to Section 3 workers within the metropolitan area or non-metropolitan county where the project is located. Where it is feasible, priority for these opportunities and training should be given to Section 3 workers residing within the service area or neighborhood of the project, and to those who are participants in youth-built programs. There are also Section 3 requirements with respect to contracting. To the greatest extent feasible and consistent with existing federal, state, and local laws and regulations, subrecipients and developers shall ensure contracts for work awarded in connection with Section 3 projects are provided to business concerns that provide economic opportunities to Section 3 workers residing within the metropolitan area or the non-metropolitan county in which the project is located. Again, where feasible, priority for contracting opportunities described here should be given to Section 3 business concerns that provide economic opportunities to Section 3 workers residing within the service area or neighborhood of the project, and to youth build programs. And thinking of all of the Section 3 worker information that's going on, HUD has established Section 3 benchmarks for the number of hours that Section 3 workers and targeted Section 3 workers should work on a project. The Section 3 benchmarks are minimum targets that must be reached for the subrecipient or developer to be considered in compliance with Section 3 requirements. These benchmarks are updated every 3 years by HUD by way of Federal Register notice. The benchmark for Section 3 workers is currently 25% or more of the total labor hours for an assisted project each year. This is calculated by dividing the number of hours worked by Section 3 workers by the total number of labor hours worked by all workers on a Section 3 project. The benchmark for the targeted Section 3 workers is currently 5% or more of total labor hours for assisted projects each year. This is calculated by dividing the total number of labor hours worked by targeted Section 3 workers by the total number of labor hours worked by all workers on a Section 3 project. This means that the 5% benchmark applicable to targeted Section 3 workers is included as part of the larger 25% threshold requirement for Section 3 workers. Meeting these outcome benchmarks provides recipients a safe harbor where HUD presumes the recipient is complying with Section 3 requirements. But it is important to note that Section 3 requirements do not apply to material-only contracts or contracts that do not require any labor. In those instances, Section 3 is encouraged but not required. Finally, professional service contracts for non-construction services that require an advanced degree or professional licensing are not required to be reported as part of the total Section 3 labor hours. However, we'll discuss later an opportunity for subrecipients and developers to receive a bonus if they're able to report Section 3 labor hours in the professional services context. We can take this time after going through all of the new definitions and the benchmarks to look at an example. DED awards the City of Anytown $300,000 of CDBG funds for street improvements. Because the total amount of assistance to the project exceeds the threshold of $200,000, the Section 3 requirements apply to this project. DED must require the City of Anytown to report the following accomplishments to DED within the applicable reporting cycles. This will include the total labor hours worked by Section 3 workers, and the total labor hours worked by targeted Section 3 workers on a Section 3 project. The City of Anytown is responsible for reporting labor hour data related to the street improvements. During the first reporting period, the City of Anytown reports to DED a total of 5,000 labor hours worked on the project. Of that total, 1,300 were worked by employees who self-certified as Section 3 workers. Additionally, 300 of those 1,300 hours were performed by workers who lived within a 1-mile radius of the worksite. Therefore, they qualify as targeted Section 3 workers. Based on this, the City of Anytown has met the project-level Section 3 benchmarks and can report the following data on the next reporting cycle. So we can take a look at the table down here. Again, they reported a total of 5,000 total labor hours, 1,300 Section 3 labor hours. If we divide that 1,300 labor hours worked by Section 3 workers by the total 5,000 labor hours worked by all workers on the project, we get 26%. This exceeds the 25% benchmark set forth by HUD. And again, 300 of those hours are worked by targeted Section 3 workers, so we can divide those 300 hours worked by targeted Section 3 workers by the 5,000 hours for the total labor hours. In making that calculation, we get 6%. This exceeds the 5% benchmark set forth by HUD. As a reminder, the 5% threshold for targeted Section 3 workers is included as part of the larger 25% threshold required for Section 3 workers. If benchmarks are met, subrecipients and developers fall under the safe harbor and are considered to be in compliance with Section 3 requirements, absent any evidence to the contrary. We do understand the challenges in meeting some of these requirements, so there are qualitative efforts additionally too that go alongside trying to meet these Section 3 requirements. In that vein, subrecipients and developers are required to make best efforts, or to the greatest extent feasible, to achieve those benchmarks for the number of labor hours performed by Section 3 workers and targeted Section 3 workers. Subrecipients and developers must adequately document the qualitative efforts taken to meet those numerical goals, and we've laid out some examples of best efforts that demonstrate a commitment to comply with Section 3. These include engaging in outreach efforts to generate job applicants who are targeted Section 3 workers. This could be done by hosting one or more job fairs or providing training or apprenticeship opportunities. You could provide direct assistance to Section 3 workers to help seek and compete for jobs, whether that be through resume assistance, coaching, interview prep, or job placement. Provide assistance for work readiness and retention through work readiness activities, interview clothing, test fees, transportation, or childcare. Provide assistance for attendance to a community college, a four-year educational institution, or a vocational or technical training through scholarship, test prep fees, and application support, or direct assistance to obtain financial literacy training and/or coaching. We've got a couple more examples of best efforts as well here too. It could be providing direct support to Section 3 businesses to identify and secure bids from Section 3 business concerns, or to assist Section 3 businesses in understanding and bidding on contracts. Finally, you can encourage opportunities for Section 3 businesses to participate by dividing contracts into smaller jobs to facilitate participation by Section 3 business concerns, by providing bonding assistance, guarantees, or other efforts to support viable bids from Section 3 business concerns, or by promoting the use of business registries designed to create opportunities for disadvantaged and small businesses. As a rule, it is important to document any and all actions taken to comply with the requirements. If you do not document the action taken, it is difficult to conclude that it ever happened, so be careful to capture all the actions taken to comply. Documenting who, what, when, why, and how is helpful in capturing details of qualitative efforts. Be sure to identify dates, events, or print or email communications that would help demonstrate your commitment to comply with Section 3. We do want to take an opportunity to point to you a few of HUD's resources intended to help subrecipients and developers meet their Section 3 benchmarks. The HUD's Section 3 Opportunity Portal may be used by Section 3 workers, targeted Section 3 workers, or employers to identify job and training opportunities as well as contracting opportunities. Similarly, HUD's Section 3 Business Registry is a listing of firms that have self-certified that they meet one of the regulatory definitions of a Section 3 business and are included in a searchable online database that can be used by agencies that receive HUD funds, developers, or contractors. The database can also be used by Section 3 workers to identify businesses that may have HUD-funded employment opportunities. And again, these resources may be helpful in meeting Section 3 benchmarks or in demonstrating those qualitative efforts taken to meet the benchmarks. Now moving to the meat of why we are here, specifically the Section 3 reporting. As we've seen so far, Section 3 requires tracking and reporting of labor hours. Labor hours must be tracked for persons who are working on an assisted project. Reporting of these labor hours must be submitted to DED as described within the agreement between the subrecipient or developer and DED, or in any associated instructional guidance. For example, Rebecca will walk through later the forms we have prepared that assist in subrecipients and developers reporting to DED. Information to be submitted includes the total number of labor hours worked by the subrecipients, developers, contractors, and subcontractors, including the total number of labor hours worked, the total number of labor hours worked by Section 3 workers, and the total number of labor hours worked by targeted Section 3 workers. Similarly, subrecipients and developers are responsible to make all entities that they contract with aware of the need to comply with Section 3 requirements. As discussed previously, professional service hours are excluded from the reporting requirement for Section 3 and targeted Section 3 workers because it is very difficult to recruit and hire eligible persons for these roles due to the higher wages and salaries earned for these types of jobs. Subrecipients and developers should not include any labor hours worked for professional services in the total labor hours worked on the project. This is the denominator of that calculation we did previously. However, if the employees in the professional services roles meet the definition of a Section 3 worker or targeted Section 3 worker, subrecipients can report their labor hours in the applicable worker hour category. The effect of this reporting structure is to give the subrecipient or developer a bonus if they are able to report Section 3 labor hours in the professional services context. Additionally, subrecipients and developers must adequately document the qualitative efforts taken to meet the numerical goals and convey those efforts through the reporting process as well. I'm going to take an opportunity just to identify examples of professional services. This could be legal services, financial consulting, accounting services, environmental assessment, architectural services, or civil engineering services. We do want to note that getting certified as a certified CDBG administrator does not qualify you as a professional services for purposes of Section 3. Just to repeat that, if you are certified as a CDBG certified administrator through the state of Nebraska's DED's program, this does not qualify you for professional service hours for purposes of Section 3 regulations. Finally, documentation must be retained by the subrecipient or developer to ensure that workers meet the definition of a Section 3 worker or targeted Section 3 worker. For Section 3 workers, this documentation may include a worker self-certification that their income is below the threshold from the prior calendar year, a self-certification of participation in public housing or Section 8 assisted housing, certification from a public housing agency, or employer certification that the worker's income is of a certain threshold based on the worker's income from that employer, or that the employer certification is that the worker works for a Section 3 business concern. For targeted Section 3 workers, the documentation may include the following: an employer's confirmation that the worker resides within 1 mile of the work site or within within whatever that distance may be to encompass 5,000 people within the work site. The employer's certification that the worker is employed by a Section 3 business concern, or the worker's self-certification as a youth build participant. Now Rebecca is going to walk through the forms that DED has created to help subrecipients and developers meet these record-keeping requirements in more detail. Now.
Thank you, Mackenzie. Hi, everyone. As Mackenzie mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, my name is Rebecca Shademan. I'll be running through the following slides. The department has created 3 certification forms and 1 contractor hours log to assist you in collecting this information and being in compliance with this regulation. Next slide. So these 3 certification forms are as follows. The Section 3 Business Concern Certification Form. A business may use this form to certify with supporting documentation that it qualifies as a Section 3 business concern. Next form is called Contractor Permanent Workforce Certification Form. A business may use this form to qualify its workers as Section 3 workers and/or targeted Section 3 workers. And lastly, the Section 3 and targeted Section 3 workers self-certification forms. An individual may use this form to self-certify that he or she qualifies as a Section 3 or targeted Section 3 worker. Next slide. Next up, we created this table that identifies the regulation reference records to be maintained and the created DED forms that correlate with that record retention. So this slide focuses on the Section 3 records to be maintained. So we'll go through this list real quick. The worker's self-certification that their income is below the income limit from prior calendar years. That connects with our corresponding DED form called Section 3 and targeted Section 3 worker self-certification form. The worker's self-certification of participation in public housing or Section 8 assisted housing. That correlates with our Section 3 and targeted Section 3 worker self-certification form. We're going to skip down to the next one. That states employer certification that the worker's income from that employer is below the income limit when based on the employer's calculation of what the worker's wage rate would translate to if annualized on a full-time basis. That correlates with our DED form called Contractor Permanent Workforce Certification Form. Next up is the employer certification that the worker is employed by Section 3 business concern. That correlates with the Section 3 business concern certification form. We want to go to the next slide. So this slide is similar to the prior slide, except it relates to the records to be maintained for targeted Section 3 workers. So the employer's confirmation that a worker's residence is within 1 mile of the work site, or if fewer than 5,000 people live within 1 mile of a work site, within a circle centered on the work site that is sufficient to encompass a population of 5,000 people, the corresponding DED form with that would be the Contractor Permanent Workforce Certification Form. The employer's certification that the worker is employed by a Section 3 business concern, that correlates with the DED form labeled Section 3 Business Concern Certification Form. Or if you are meeting the records through the worker's self-certification as a youth bill participant, that correlates with the DED form called Section 3 and targeted Section 3 Worker Self-Certification Form. Next up, we are going to go over these certification forms that DED created. So give us a moment and we will navigate to that. So next up, we have displayed here the Section 3 Business Concern Certification Form. So this form is completed by the business if they want to qualify as a Section 3 business concern and they believe they meet one of the following criteria. So number one, at least 51% of the business is owned and controlled by a low or very low income person. 2, at least 51% of the business is owned and controlled by current public housing residents or residents who currently live in Section 8 assisted housing. Or 3, over 75% of the labor hours performed for the business over the prior 3-month period are performed by Section 3 workers. So in order for a business to qualify, they need to meet at least one of those. So the business will complete the following table on this page 1 and then navigate to the second page. And this is where they are identifying which criteria they are going to be meeting. So I want to highlight some of the documentation in addition to the completed version of this form that they'll need to provide. So if they are planning on meeting criteria number 1, at least 51% of the business is owned and controlled by low or very low income persons. If they check this box, they need to provide the following 2 items. Number 1, proof of ownership showing all owners and their percentage ownership. And 2, completed Section 3 worker self-certification form for all low and very low income owners. So if they aren't able to meet that criteria, they'll move down to the next criteria, which is that at least 51% of the business is owned and controlled by current public housing residents or residents who currently live in Section 8 housing. They'll need to provide us with 2 pieces of information: proof of ownership showing all owners and their percentage ownership, and the completed Section 3 worker self-certification form for all public housing and or Section 8 owners. If they aren't able to meet that criteria, we'll move on to the third one. Over 75% of the labor hours performed for the business over the prior 3-month period are performed by the Section 3 workers. So we'll need 2 additional items. First up, for the last 90 days, full payrolls for the entire company. Make a list of names from the payroll of the Section 3 workers, include the county of residence, and documentation demonstrating that such persons qualify as Section 3 workers. Once they are able to identify one of those criteria that they are able to meet that criteria and be identified as a Section 3 business concern, they will finish out the affirmation below that you see in front of you with their official name, signature, title, company name, and date. Mackenzie, is there anything else you would like to add?
I don't think so, Rebecca. That was a good job. Thank you. I'll go ahead and pull up the Contractor Permanent Workforce Certification form next.
Great. Okay, next up we have the Section 3 Contractor Permanent Workforce form. So we have some instructions here. This form is completed by the employer to certify that the worker's income from the employer is below the income limit when based on the employer's calculation of what the worker's wage rate would translate to if annualized on a full-time basis. The employer would also be identifying if that individual is a targeted Section 3 worker based off of their residence and the Section 3 project location. So remember, they have to be within a certain mileage distance there. So we're gonna go down to the second page and we're gonna run through a couple of examples here. And Mackenzie, if you scroll up just a little bit. So we just wanna make sure that the employer completes the employer name up above. You'll be dealing with several records, so make sure that the form is fully complete and you can track it back to each contractor and have them reference the project name and agreement number. So here, what is great about this form is an employer could qualify several employees all at once. So we have a couple of examples. They would need to complete all the columns A through G. So we have Nancy Drew. She is identified as a detective. We have her residence identified and her annual salary with the company. Based off of her address, we know that she is within 1 mile of our work site. So we mark that as yes. And then based off of her salary of $35,000, we took a look at the 80% median income for her county of residence. So we're gonna pull that up real quick. So for our example, we're gonna pretend that Nancy lives in Adams County. And so the 80% of annual income is set at $45,100. Nancy is below that number, so she does qualify as a Section 3 worker. So we're going to mark yes in that column. So then in column G, since we have yeses in both column E and F, that means she is a targeted Section 3 worker. Next up is Sherlock Holmes. He's also a detective. He also lives in Anytown, Nebraska, and makes $40,100. Now remember, this town is in Adams County. Their 80% median income is $45,100. That is above what he makes. So he's making below that, and so he does meet 80%, and we mark yes. And based off of his address, he does not live within 1 mile of the work site. So we identify him in column G as a Section 3 worker. Next up is Bruce Wayne. He is a millionaire, also lives in Anytown, Nebraska. His salary is $1 million. He makes well above $45,100. So we are marking no in column E. And he does live within 1 mile of the work site. So in column G, we identify him as not a Section 3 worker. So we'll navigate down a little bit further. Once the employer has everything completed on here, they will complete the employer certification, and this will need to be maintained in your records. Anything else you want to add, Mackenzie?
I don't think so, Rebecca. That was a good distinction to show all of the 3 different types of when they qualify as a Section 3 worker. Just one thing to point out with Bruce Wayne, we did note that he did live within the 1 mile of the work site, but because he didn't meet the income requirements, that's what disqualified him and did not allow him to be qualified as a Section 3 worker. So it was yes in column F, but because he was no in column E, that is why he's not a Section 3 worker. Thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you. Next up, we'll navigate to the next form. Next up, we have the Section 3 worker and targeted Section 3 worker self-certification form. So the worker would fill this out and complete this information. They would identify their name and also their county of residency. And then they would indicate with check marks on the following questions. So we're going to first figure out the Section 3 worker certification. So they're going to answer, are you a resident of public housing or a housing choice voucher holder, Section 8? Yes or no. Then they're going to go to the next question and we'll be asking them, do you qualify as a Section 3 worker? Go to page 3, and then they'll find their county of residence income limits and check yes if on page 3 you selected at or below your county's 80% area median income. So for our example earlier, we used Adams County. So this individual will be identifying if they make at or below 45,100 or above that. So we'll just need a circle on this page whether they make more or less than 45,100. So if they indicate at or below, they will indicate yes on this form. Next up, we'll be focusing on, are they a targeted Section 3 worker? So our question for them is, are you a participant of a youth build program? And they'll indicate either yes or no. And then if you scroll down to the next page, we have an employee affirmation to ensure that everything is true and correct on the form. The employee fills this out. Mackenzie, is there anything else you would like to add?
Yes, thanks for walking through that, Rebecca. Just as a reminder, as demonstrated in the presentation, these documents are several different ways to demonstrate compliance with record-keeping requirements for Section 3. So you may use the different mechanisms. Not all of the forms are required depending on which form you decide to use and the instructions that are located within that form. One difference here from that Section 3 business concern certification form, there were required supplemental documentation that needed to be added. For example, the proof of ownership in the business. In this instance, this is a self-certification, so there is no supplemental documentation that needs to be added to this certification form if you go this route and using this as record-keeping documentation as qualification for a Section 3 worker or targeted Section 3 worker. That's all I have, though. Thank you so much, Rebecca.
Thank you. Next, we'll go back to the PowerPoint. So next up, I wanted to talk about the tracking of Section 3 and targeted Section 3 worker hours. So we just went through all the certification forms to identify which workers are Section 3 or targeted Section 3, or maybe they're not Section 3 workers at all. So you need to first identify that, and then next you have to then count all the hours they worked on a Section 3 project. We do need to know all of the hours worked by all parties. So we will navigate to the form we created.
Here we go.
So here we had the Section 3 labor hours tracking form. We created this in an Excel document. It'll first show you the totals page on the first tab. We have inputted several calculations in the background of this Excel document. So please be aware, you don't need to really edit anything on here, but if you notice something that's not calculating correctly, please contact the agency. You'll also notice there are sub-tabs in this Excel document labeled company 1, 2, 3, 4. Depending on how many companies are working on the Section 3 project, you may have these all filled out, or maybe you would only have 3. So it really depends on the size of your project. Let's go ahead and click into the first tab labeled company 1. So the first thing you want to do when you are completing these is identifying the company name. So based off of our early examples, we've already identified 3 workers working on our project. First up is Nancy Drew. We have identified her as a Section 3 worker, and she is a targeted Section 3 worker. So we marked both of those yes. So if you are a targeted Section 3 worker, you are also a Section 3 worker. So those would always be yes. We also identified the payroll number. We're in our first week, and so far this week, Nancy has only worked 30 hours. Cool. Next up, we have Sherlock Holmes. From our earlier example on the form, we indicated that he was a Section 3 worker, and he is not a targeted Section 3 worker. For payroll number 1, Sherlock worked 40 hours. Next up, we have Bruce Wayne. He has when he completed his form, he is not a Section 3 worker, and he is also not a targeted Section 3 worker. He worked a total of 30 hours for payroll number, week 1. So you'll notice that as we were inputting numbers into week 1, that the table up above has been auto-calculating. We have formatted this to include those. Please just double check numbers. If you notice a calculation error, please let us know and we can help you navigate through that. So at this point in time, they are meeting their benchmark goals for the project. So this will help you keep in mind the benchmark goals throughout the life of the project. Mackenzie, is there anything else you would like to add?
One option too that we want to just raise for you guys, we only had 3 employees working on this project here, but there could be an opportunity where there were several other millionaires working on the project besides Bruce Wayne. And because they aren't qualifying themselves as Section 3 workers or targeted Section 3 workers, it is permissible to aggregate all of those hours together. So for example, if you had Bill Gates and Warren Buffett also joining Bruce Wayne on this project, and none of them qualify as Section 3 or targeted Section 3 workers, you could aggregate their hours together and have their worker name be all non-Section 3 worker labor hours, just kind of aggregating those together so you don't have to input each individual non-Section 3 worker. So that's just an option that you have there just to minimize the amount of entries that you have to do. But otherwise, that's all I have, Rebecca. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. So if you navigate back to the first tab labeled totals, I just wanted to show everyone how it is auto-calculating all of the numbers. So you'll see if we would have completed Company 2 tab, the numbers would have auto-filled in that total column on line 18 of the Excel document. Those are your key numbers that you will be inputting for within the Amplifund form that we'll be discussing later on in the presentation. Okay, so what's next for all of you is upcoming reporting. So an important note, the upcoming semi-annual reporting period will be a catch-up cycle. Subrecipients, developers should complete a Section 3 reporting to cover period from July 1st, 2021 to June 30th, 2022. So a whole year of information going on. Now, that is all we want to see in Amplifund on the report being submitted to us. However, for the period of November 30th of 2020 to June 30th, 2021, subrecipients and developers will be expected to maintain records of statutory and contractual compliance with Section 3 for these projects, but will not be required to report to DED on the requirements found in 24 CFR Part 75. So you would need to maintain records. So if you are working on the CDBG grant and you're trying to determine if your project is part of this requirement, take a look at your DED agreement between DED and the local unit of government and identify the period of performance. If the period of performance is after November 30th, 2020, you will need to follow 24 CFR Part 75. Now for the home and HTF programs, it is based off of the commitment date of funds for a property. So if you have a property where you committed funds after November 30th of 2020, you would be following 24 CFR Part 75 for that property address. Now, there are some situations in the home and HTF program where you potentially could be following both regulations at the same time, and records still need to be maintained for both of those. So we will navigate next to talk a little bit more about reporting. So we have created a reporting in Amplifund. You would complete one Section 3 form as a part of the project status reporting for each activity. So we will navigate to the DED's Amplifund website and go over that form. Okay, so now we are logged into Amplifund. We have already navigated to our project that needs to follow the 24 CFR Part 75 rules. So in order to navigate to the custom reports, on this project status form, we're going to go to the custom tab, and you'll see there is an item that says project status. You will see in there a form called project status, section 3, part 75. You're going to go ahead and open that form. Once that form opens, you will click on the plus sign to create a brand new form. Then that will create a brand new form for you to complete. So some of our recipients in the CDBG program have already been submitting project status reports. So we're going to pretend we've been doing a couple project status reports so far. So this is going to be technically our third project status report. We are doing a catch-up year. This report is due July 30th. So this is for reporting year 2022. And you're going to select the radial button that says January 1st through June 30th. And then we will go down to section 3 hours. So you will be completing a separate section 3 form for each activity. So for example, we're going to select street improvements. Since street improvements are an infrastructure, you do not need to complete the address field. However, if you are doing a facility project, please complete the address field so then we have record of that worksite location in here. Then you will identify the total labor hours during the reporting period. So just remember, this is a catch-up year. You are identifying all the labor hours that occurred from July 1st, 2021 to June 30th, 2022. So we have a total of 100 hours. This correlates with our prior example. Our section 3 hours are 70. And Mackenzie, I don't recall our targeted section 30. Thank you. 30 hours. So we have reported all the hours just for this reporting period of July 1st to June 30th. If you will also have certification forms completed and also that your tracking spreadsheet of the labor hours, please upload those into Amplifund. Again, if you're having problems uploading any documents, feel free to reach out to your program rep and we can figure out some troubleshooting solutions there. Next up, we'll go into the section 3 efforts taken. These are all listed from the regulation. So please identify if you took, if the subrecipient took any, or developer took any of these steps to do outreach for section 3 or targeted section 3 workers. There could be a moment where no efforts were taken during the reporting period. So we do have a checkbox for you. This is the required field. So you do need to select at least one. If you had any outreach or other efforts conducted, please upload the documentations demonstrating your compliance with that. And we do have an upload file location there. And then if there are any additional notes you want us to be aware of that we need to be aware of, feel free to add it into the note field. Next up, we have a certification form certifying that all the information is true and accurate to the best of your knowledge and that you are authorized to complete this form and submit it to the DED. You'll input your first and last names and then also check the box stating that you are agreed to the above certification. Form completion, this is very key. You'll need to mark yes once you are all done with this form and you're ready for us to submit, and then indicate the date of completion. Once you have all the fields completed, you'll hit create and the form will be created. And you'll do this for each activity on your CDBG project. Mackenzie, is there anything else you would like to add?
I don't think so. Thanks, Rebecca.
Yep. So upcoming items that need to be taken into consideration are subrecipients and developers should update the Section 3 related processes and procedures and communicate expectations related to the Section 3 final rule. So please assess your current active agreements with NDED to determine which set of Section 3 rules apply, 24 CFR Part 135 or 24 CFR Part 75. If you are a home and HTF program, you might be applying to both of those. So please be aware of which rules apply for your situation. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to your program rep. You also want to take inventory of solicitation package templates and other relevant documents to update Section 3 applicable language, relay Section 3 final rule changes to contractors or prospective proposers, and ensure contractor understanding of Section 3 reporting, communicate clear record-keeping duties to contractors, continue outreach efforts after winning bidder proposer is awarded, and prepare for upcoming catch-up reporting cycle. We do have a couple Section 3 resources available to you. The department has created a Section 3 webpage. There is also the HUD Section 3 guidebook, the Section 3 HUD FAQs, the HUD income limits, and also the CPD notices. There was CPD 21-07 that relates to the final rule requirements for home and HTF projects, and the CPD 21-09, which relates to the CDBG, CDBG-CB, CDBG-DR, CDBG-MIT, Neighborhood Stabilization Program, Section 108, and RHP projects. Upcoming office hours, questions about Section 3 and upcoming reporting requirements. NDED is hosting open office hours to address questions related to the new Section 3 final rule on Tuesday, May 24th, 2:30 to 4 p.m. and Wednesday, May 25th, 9:30 to 11 a.m. Please register by going to opportunity.nebraska.gov/events. If you have any questions regarding Section 3, we do recommend you contact the three individuals identified on the slide. For the Home and HTF program, Michelle Grimes, CDBG, Rebecca Shademan, CDBG-DR, Mackenzie Martin-Waldron. If you are sending an email, please include Section 3 in the subject line of any emails regarding the Section 3 final rule in this presentation, and please email it to all three of us. We are all taking a concerted effort to understanding Section 3 for all the programs and hopefully get your question answered as immediately as possible. This concludes our presentation.